Okay, so I had the wildest idea that I've ever had, and it's something I ran by ThreatMap, and we got an interesting reaction. I've had a few chats about the idea, and thus far it's gotten an interesting reaction, so I'll actually make it public. As per the title of the video, I have a wild idea of what the TicTacs actually are, and I'm going to run a series of tests to see if they actually are. I might even do this on Twitch because YouTube doesn't really allow me to show these videos. So basically, uh, the TicTac UFOs are white Eve Podships. So a Eve Podship is that's a corpse. A Eve pod is, well, that's basically a very stylized Eve pod. This is an Eve pod. Uh, there's uh, this is an Eve pod. So it's basically like an egg. So these are usually golden or copper colored, and we're very distinctly seeing whites like all throughout, which makes me think they're from, if they are to be Eves like TicTacs, which would be like basically the Nordic aliens, they'd be like these guys. Now, if it's Sisters of Eve, it's the Eve's equivalent of basically the Red Cross. These guys have, in none of my explorations of what people do wrong when you have a corporation supposed to help like build wells, and they end up stealing the money. These people have a very clear record in that regard. They do have errors. Let me make that clear. Their error is Einsteinian exploration. They're the people most likely to end up waking up some warp gate thing. But in terms of their actual corruption, they're like the squeaky cleanest group I have ever seen. So I would have to say, on Earth terms, they'd be like some really high-end humanitarian aid group. I don't think even Red Cross has the same level of goodness. I mean, they'd be higher than that, but Red Cross could be a very good like example, or Red Crescent, or Red whatever, the humanitarian Reds, the ones who don't get involved in politics and just bring you a package of food and say good day and leave. These guys. And if this is what we're seeing, then we are seeing this cave rescue, and we're seeing this. Because if this is the place I think it is literally a tomb for like, there's still basically a vacant life, but it's technically a tomb. So if that is the case, the rescue is from things which we basically do to each other and our planet without awareness. It's not from things we think we're doing wrong. Like it won't be like the Crusaders rescuing you. It'll be literally stuff we haven't conceptual understanding of being like disease or danger. It's going to be really weird. It's gonna provide a lot of very good like help to people, but it's gonna be ethically speaking a weird day. It'll be a weird day. But the Red Cross or similar might be the only authority who could be like reasonably said to be able to like handle a contact on Earth from the other side, like they being like the aliens. If it's somebody like a government or like almost any public figure or group, it's just gonna end in a genocide. Somebody's gonna get genocided. If it's literally a Red Cross aid ship that shows up in orbit, we might be willing to talk. Like it's conceivably possible. If it's anything resembling economics or military, we will just blow up. Period. We won't do that kind of stuff. If it's literally the cave rescue ship and they go like, oh my god, and there's like TicTacs, we might be able to survive. If it's gonna be some kind of like military integration into somebody's particular nation state, everybody's gonna show up. And it's gonna just turn into an enormous blood ball on the orbit. And for the next like 100,000 years, there will be debris raining down from orbit while we farm potatoes. And anybody thinking of going into space will be literally shot in the head within the first 5 seconds. And that's what happens if it's somebody like who does the normal thing, because everybody else will think their normal thing is the wrong thing, and it'll just, end up with everybody showing up. And when there's a lot of people in a tight space and it's a new situation, there will be somebody freaking out. And then there will be a lot of pew pew, which is why we generally don't accept it. Even showing up like 100 light years and a million years distant and doing a trade fleet that Earth knows about, if it's revolving around Earthlings, it's probably going to be nuked. Has to do with basically the fact that the previous guy who led a state whose primary job was the space thing and explode the space thing, they ended up being pretty much a bad guy. Our understanding of world leaders and political power associated with space is that it hasn't gone that well. Now we're very carefully looking at the one pygmy. It even literally looks like a space alien. That much we're willing to allow, so everybody understands if it fucks up, who's fucking up. We're allowing the one instigator match. No more. If it goes well and it doesn't turn into basically the Twitter Nazi in the first 5 seconds, which it turns like it will, looks like it will, we will allow like general space exploration. If not, then not. And Mr. Elon's ability to cope with dissenting opinions has been noted as being poor. It's not a criticism on Mr. Elon, it's a criticism of what the particulars of that field of research do to human beings. When you look into the void looks into you. You literally have to consistently and constantly, with a lot of effort, force yourself to care if you explore space. You like you would take a shower every day. You must force yourself at least once a day to really get to the mood of caring about people. Like seeing the stuff you did as painful to people and going through the absolution process. Because space is a thing which turns you into space if you go into space. And space is very cold, hostile, and deadly. The same way if you do very dangerous research on Earth things, you know, do the hygiene. I don't mean be religious. I mean go through contrition. They're different things. Because you are exploring something that we know to be the very essence of death and stuff of that nature. If you do not publicly show your understanding of the danger of the field you're researching, we will not follow you. We will invent a theory that we will follow. And the more like ludicrous our theory, the more ludicrous we see your theory as. I mean, it's pretty obscene that I have to explain it to you, but that is what it is. Like the flat Earth theory. Okay. You know what's funny? The universe is a flat plane. It's energy and matter, or time and space. So it's a two-dimensional plane. It's a flat universe. You know, that's what's funny. Okay, so if it's a flat universe, why do we experience 3 dimensions? If we experience 3 dimensions, how can some people rise above 3 dimensions to say 4 dimensions? How does some form of life get to 4 dimensions? And so on. But that would lead you to the fabled New Age book, and you'd have an aneurysm. That's kind of like the thing. So Sisters of Eve would be the one group. Basically, if I really had to think worldwide, Eve-wide, every fantasy-wide, who would I accept to contact Earth? There'd be basically like Naruto, Sisters of Eve. I wouldn't allow CCP to play the role. It's just a company making Eve. I wouldn't allow 90% of the corporations on Eve, so I wouldn't allow 95 to 99% of the corporations on any top 500 list. I wouldn't allow any nation that has committed an aggressive war ever, even if it's been justified and preemptive. I wouldn't allow any of those. I wouldn't allow any nation that's tested even weapons of mass destruction, barring those tests being on only volunteers of their own side. Even that would be very hideous to me. I wouldn't allow anybody who basically endorses as a nation state, like poor people remaining poor and so on. So the actual list of if somebody is to show up in orbit, and I would have to say these are people we should talk to, is the initial list is basically every human on the planet. But after you put 5 minutes of thought into it, you're going to end up with 5 groups, basically. And no, I wouldn't allow myself to be in any of them. No. This one I'm taking from the ground. For reasons. Sisters of Eve, if they are the people doing the TicTacs and are the pod pilots of Sisters of Eve, are literally, it's literally the equivalent of Red Cross Switzerland, for example, sending a humanitarian convoy very publicly composed in its workers of only the very high-end people of the Switzerland Red Cross to San Francisco, and they have a budget of $300 trillion or something along those lines. That would be the equivalent of what would happen. That would be a very good equivalent. So in terms of Eve. That's a very interesting choice. This relies on a couple of things. That the white things are pod pilots, which is completely like unknown, and that they are white pod pilots instead of golden or copper, which would be the normal color. And they are using, if they are pod pilots, the one who has white color scheme as a large organization on Eve, which would be the humanitarian aid. That relies on the theory that we've managed to gain a lot of attention in Eve through various things, which is completely plausible. In terms of UFO stories, and which of our actions in terms of UFO interactions would elicit a response, logically speaking, the act of building the Eve network would be one of those. To show why, I will show you a very specific video. Eve coding timeline. So here is we'll start to see some amazing things which will show that the company is actually doing. I'm sure in the beginning, pay attention to, if you can, to what the branches are called, like roughly speaking. You don't have to follow every interaction, it's like a clustered piece. But you'll notice a trend of what they're doing. Here you'll see like the code itself is the great part. It's broken into three branches, the client, the server, and the common, which makes sense. Then there's the actual game, which is the purple and blue, which is coded half by this H and half by basically 60. Now there's one more branch, and I don't recall very specifically all the changes. Yes, this is the one where they start with these like named female structures. They're doing something which shows to me like they're actually building a human structure. This they're literally analyzing even they'll get to some very interesting analytical details later on. The overlaps between the little bit between like consciously holding this pattern and close to these two patterns, studying the overlap between the common and the female, occasionally between the client and the female, but mostly between the code, the common. Yeah. Wait until it starts analyzing something beyond the females and its immediate environment. That'll be interesting. It'll show you a couple of things. Currently, they're building the game code based on the changes that they need to do based on the first lesson. Basically, like enormous databases with like a couple of very small subsets, and everything running around the center databases. There's like four physical attributes and spiritual stuff that they transition from being filtered to some level in programmation. And the game itself. Now they're looking very specifically here at the overlap of the server structure with the edges of the game structure. And if I recall, completely up here. interesting part is that they're looking at these edges if they overlap with each other. Well, this will happen a lot later in a very significant way. This isn't as clear as it will be in a later stage. And they're doing the same. Game structure connects to basically the pocket of the spirit world through the basic code, which is just like the machine interface, and beyond it is like the organic end. Like, you could almost call it flower. But yeah, basically a flower. This would be like basically potato root. This is like something along the lines of like this might be like the new root, if you will. At some point, they're going to make one change, which to me really showed what they're doing. This is just like interesting. It isn't that obvious what they're doing, and it isn't that like thought provoking. And because it's done by many coders, you see stuff like build, go back, build, go back, build, go back. Because it's built by different coders. It's like a honeybee structure. They know the intent, but they have a different view on what should be done. So everybody's kind of sort of going a little bit here and a little bit there. There we go. That's what I'm looking for. What the real world equivalency of, like, the real carbon equivalency of what these things are, like the real market. See how much like buzzing there is, how much people are building. All the focus is on it. And then we will see the interesting where they go with Eve and overlap with carbon. What Eve branches actually fit into real world economies. You can even see them intentionally like shifting these specific brands from over here to just a little bit over here. And they like doing this where they're kind of sort of dragging these against each other and trying to connect these. And they're building like these temples around each other. The thing is trying to see what is the real world equivalency of this is roughly where they start to become aware of how gigantic this invention is, because it isn't just like a thing, it can actually be used as a market. And roughly at this point, people are starting to make how much money is actually behind the thing, which shows up as various useful things. Certain crystal children becoming more active in life. We actually see, which is fitting. Like if we saw here what changes to really they're really putting the time into the analysis. Publicly, nobody, I think, the company doesn't publicly hold logs up more than like 3 days. But the reality is that everybody involved always holds logs. So eventually, the carbon branches. And that is roughly when I watched this where I realized what's like going on with this thing. They're looking at people labs. So Now we have three branches: like the carbon equivalency map, the Eve map, and basically the code map, or like the server map. At this point, everyone realizes we're rich, but nobody has any possible way of bringing that wealth into the real. You could make a word that would show up in the real world market for trillions. You could get paid pennies. So we realize that if we actually do come out of this system, the economy will crash because nobody will, be getting paid anything. So we think we build, we make ideas, we work, and eventually we get to the point where this structure is clear enough to start seeing the substructure, basically like the subconscious realm. It's not just the carbon map of the conscious, it's the carbon map of the subconscious. It shows up in the kind of contact scenarios that people do, which is basically first the sleepers, which is the circadian seekers, which is like the things which look for who would you be if your dreams were real and you were basically still you living your life with choice. And then slowly like other factors of subconscious mind, like what would be like, because circadian sleep means like basically sleep rhythm, like the daily cycle, like daily cycle seekers would be another word. So like different aspects of like the thought realm are popping up. So the system is looking at what the users or like the humans do when there's a subject into like different types of like interaction scenarios which are in their organic self already, but we're bringing them through like uh, physical things. And the packages thing is when they're like plugging into the neural network and just seeing like how the neurons themselves are communicating, which is what basically looks like a giant neuron. They're tracking like neuronal activity, like how much would it take for them to work inward from the impact. It's an interesting choice. They get pretty far, but even then, the amount of neurons is minuscule. It's also kind of like building an eye into the brain. It's an interesting choice, which is like driving into the test person into which the implant is built. Makes sense. They can't go in pretty far into it, but in terms of organic evolution, it is an interesting choice. Common one too. I think we can't recall what we call that type of growth in the spiritual community. It's something having to do with spider bites, if I recall. If it were to be complete, a complete growth, it would be a complete transition from physical to like awareness. But even with its entire like server capacity, they're not going to get pretty far. It's going to be like a blob. I think if I recall correctly, what they did, they stopped when it starts to grow like the 2nd round. copy of an system. It's a very good. If I recall correctly, they do one more small branch and then they the structure. I wondered, I recall them removing the packages thing. Anyway, if that's the Sisters of Eve thing, I like it. It's interesting. So, thoughts, comments, feedbacks, opinions. I can't show much on YouTube because it'll basically block it. Might even block it now. I'm not showing one video. Hell, it might even block me for showing some copyrighted videos, thumbnails on YouTube. So, Sisters of Eve would fit very well. I mean, in terms of what kind of corporation would actually benefit from it and be like the right corporation to help us with it. In those terms, it would be the right one because it just would be.